At exactly 14:15 on a Tuesday in November 2017, inside the quiet walls of Nottingham Cottage, something shifted in the British monarchy that the public would not understand for nearly a decade. The world was being given a carefully constructed image, for young royals, united, modern, and full of promise. But according to a classified internal memo from Kensington Palace, now surfacing for the first time, what was actually happening behind that closed door told a very different story. This is not speculation. This is a forensic examination of documented evidence, a record that was once marked for permanent destruction and has now reached the light. The scene that afternoon was, by all accounts, tense in a way that only insiders would recognize. Catherine, then the Duchess of Cambridge, had arrived with a clear and specific purpose. She wasn't there for pleasantries. She was there to offer something rare, a genuine guide to surviving the machinery of the British press and the centuries-old structure of the royal family. According to the memo, Catherine attempted to lay out a set of protocols, unwritten rules, the kind of institutional knowledge that takes years to learn, offered freely and in good faith. What she received in return was the first sign that something was fundamentally different about the woman Harry had chosen to marry. As Catherine spoke, Meghan did not turn around. She was occupied, meticulously arranging a collection of designer shoes that had arrived that morning. For 2 full minutes, Catherine addressed the back of her head. When Meghan finally turned, it was not with acknowledgement. It was with a brief, 2-second expression, what Catherine would later describe to Prince William as a calculated dismissal. The memo records Catherine's words directly. She said, "Meghan, there is a specific rhythm to how we serve the crown. It is about the institution, not the individual." Meghan's response was quiet, and it was directed not at Catherine, but at her assistant. She said, "I think I know a thing or two about building a brand, don't I?" To an outside observer, this might have read as a personality difference. 2 women, 2 worlds, finding their footing. But Catherine had spent nearly a decade learning what it meant to disappear into service. What she witnessed in that room was not unfamiliarity with royal life. It was indifference to it. She left the cottage and immediately requested a private meeting with Prince William. Her assessment, recorded in the memo, was not that Meghan was difficult. It was that she represented a fundamental misalignment of values, and that the misalignment was not accidental. It was deliberate. This was November 2017. The wedding was still months away, and the woman who would one day become Princess of Wales was already documenting what she believed was a threat, not to herself, but to the institution she had committed her life to. Understand what investigators are now calling a coordinated breach of royal protocol. We need to move beyond personality and into evidence. Among the documents surfacing from the Ofcom Royal Division, files held under strict security seal until recently, is what analysts are describing as a sophisticated 5-stage commercial operation. A system designed with one clear objective: to extract financial value from the royal brand while maintaining complete deniability. The mechanism worked as follows. Stage 1 was the trigger. The operation required a high-emotion public event, something with moral weight, something the press could not ignore. In this case, it was a visit to a children's cancer ward, a location previously visited by the late Queen. On the surface, a tribute. In function, according to the files, something else entirely. Stage 2 was the sink. Before Meghan stepped out of the car, her entire appearance, every item of clothing, every accessory, had already been linked to an AI-driven fashion application. An app in which the Duchess reportedly held an investment interest through a series of shell companies. Every item was preloaded with affiliate links before the visit began. Stage 3 was the distribution. Palace staff had been told the event would be low-key. But within 90 seconds of the Duchess arriving, high-definition photographs appeared across global news platforms. These were not candid phone images. They were professionally lit and immediately scraped by the application. Stage 4 was the conversion. When a viewer clicked on any image to identify what the Duchess was wearing, the AI returned a direct purchase link. Every sale generated a commission routed back to the Sussex accounts. One palace official, documented in a narrated memo, reportedly confronted the team directly. The words recorded were, "You are turning a hospital ward into a digital storefront. This is a direct violation of royal media compliance standards." Stage 5 was the denial. Every time the pattern was questioned, the response was consistent. It was described as coincidence, public fascination with her style, third-party apps beyond anyone's control. The Ofcom files suggest the operation was not coincidental. It was coordinated. For Catherine and the senior royals, the moral weight of this discovery was severe. The records indicate she was deeply disturbed by the realization that images of sick children, in a ward she considered a place of service, were functioning as backdrop for a fashion revenue scheme. This, she later reflected, was the malware she had sensed in that cottage in 2017. It was not a clash of personalities. It was a clash of something far more fundamental. Beyond the financial records, the leaked files contained something more human, and in many ways more disturbing, a collection of testimonies from former palace employees who have come to be known quietly among themselves as the Sussex Survivors Club. These are not anonymous sources. These are 450 pages of sworn forensic testimony currently held under seal at the Government Legal Department in London. The legal deadline for their full public release is set for the end of this month. What these testimonies describe is a workplace that former staff characterize as a psychological combat zone. One senior aide described Meghan's management style in specific terms. In their narrated testimony, they said, "She would deliver a smile so radiant for the cameras that it felt like sunshine. But the moment the lens was capped, the temperature dropped to absolute zero. You weren't an employee." Investigators have used a specific piece of visual evidence to corroborate these accounts, footage captured at the Sydney Opera House during a public walkabout. In the footage, when an assistant named Sarah moved slightly out of position, the camera caught a look of concentrated intensity from the Duchess. It lasted 1.5 seconds before the public expression was instantly restored. Experts who have reviewed the full 450 pages describe the Sydney incident not as an isolated moment of stress, but as representative of a recurring pattern. Staff testimonies speak of withering silences, dehumanizing critiques over minor logistical errors, and a culture in which every mistake was systematically attributed to someone else. One junior staffer's account, included in the report, states, "We were the designated fall guys for their self-perception. Every mistake had to be someone else's fault." Catherine had begun noticing this pattern within the first months of Meghan's arrival. The leaked Kensington memo from 2018 includes a quiet but pointed observation. Staff who had served the Queen for decades were suddenly resigning in tears. Catherine's recorded question at the time was straightforward. Why are the people who keep this institution running suddenly afraid to walk down the hallway? The Government Legal Department is now cross-referencing these staff testimonies with the financial records from the AI fashion operation. The question being asked is pointed. Was the culture of fear inside the household a deliberate mechanism to prevent staff from speaking about the commercial activities? If the people closest to the operation were too afraid to raise concerns, the system could function without interference. The survivors are no longer silent. They have documented the hours, the rooms, and the exact words. What the Throne Room Diary, a set of confidential internal logs recently released to select journalists in London, provides is something the public has never had before. A chronological map. Investigators are calling it the long betrayal. Not a single event, but a series of calculated decisions stretching across nearly a decade. The first critical moment in that timeline is May 2018. The Flower Girl dress fitting, a story the public heard in fragments, with conflicting versions from both sides. What the Throne Room Diary adds is a detail that changes its meaning entirely. According to the logs, a digital audio recording device was active during that confrontation. Catherine's distress in that moment was not simply the result of a stressful pre-wedding disagreement. It was, the records suggest, the realization that a private family moment was being archived, that her vulnerability was not just witnessed, it was being stored. By March 2021, that archive had a purpose. The Oprah Winfrey interview converted the private pain of the royal family into a globally distributed media asset worth millions. The diary entries from Kensington Palace during that week describe a family in shock, not at the accusations themselves, but at the nature of the breach. The unwritten code of familial trust had not just been broken, it had been packaged and sold. The power dynamic shifted again in September 2022. In the days following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, during the Windsor walkabout, Catherine, now the Princess of Wales, took the lead with a visible and quiet authority. The forensic analysis of footage from that day, included in the leaked files, notes Meghan's visible discomfort. The safety of a camera lens was not available to her. What was available was Catherine's unwavering composure. The logs describe it as the moment the firewall finally held. Then March 2024. Catherine's video announcement regarding her cancer diagnosis. A moment of profound personal courage, offered publicly with grace and simplicity. Within minutes of that announcement, according to the Throne Room Diary, the Sussex PR operation launched a campaign for a luxury lifestyle product. The contrast, as documented in the files, is described as the point of irreversible public opinion shift. One woman asking the world for privacy during a health crisis. The other using the resulting surge in royal search traffic to drive product sales. The diary notes it plainly. The Sussex brand, from that moment forward, was no longer perceived as a modern alternative to the monarchy. It was perceived as something that fed on it. The declassified files introduce a framework that the government legal department has termed the sovereign divide. It is the clearest articulation, in official language, of what this decade-long conflict was actually about. On one side, a philosophy of me, individual branding, visibility, transaction. On the other, a philosophy of us, service, continuity, disappearance of the self into something larger. The files use a specific incident to illustrate the distinction, and it is, in its simplicity, the most powerful contrast in the entire dossier. During the late Queen's centenary celebrations, amid the crowds and the cameras, Catherine encountered an 88-year-old former police officer named Tony, who had recently lost his wife. The cameras were pointed elsewhere. A security detail ambient microphone captured what happened. Catherine leaned in, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "We will always be here. You are not alone in this." There was no press release, no behind-the-scenes footage, no affiliate link. The professional assessment included in the 2026 dossier describes this as the core competency of a future queen, the capacity to provide genuine human connection without any requirement for transaction. A promise of continuity, not a pitch for followers. The Sussex logs from that same period record a different kind of planning. The launch date for a luxury product line was being aligned with the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's passing, calculated, the logs show, to capture the peak search volume of that morning. What Meghan reportedly viewed as Catherine's lack of imagination. Dismissing her, according to sources, as an untalented prude, the 2026 revelations reframe entirely. What was dismissed as limitation was actually discipline. What was mistaken for absence of talent was the deliberate, principled refusal to perform for profit. The documents conclude with a clear institutional position. You cannot lead an institution if your primary interest is in leading a brand. One approach extracts value from the crown. The other adds value to the lives of the people the crown exists to serve. The declassified files introduce a framework that the government legal department has termed the sovereign divide. It is the clearest articulation, in official language, of what this decade-long conflict was actually about. On one side, a philosophy of me, individual branding, visibility, transaction. On the other, a philosophy of us, service, continuity, disappearance of the self into something larger. The files use a specific incident to illustrate the distinction, and it is, in its simplicity, the most powerful contrast in the entire dossier. During the late Queen's centenary celebrations, amid the crowds and the cameras, Catherine encountered an 88-year-old former police officer named Tony, who had recently lost his wife. The cameras were pointed elsewhere. A security detail ambient microphone captured what happened. Catherine leaned in, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "We will always be here. You are not alone in this." There was no press release, no behind-the-scenes footage, no affiliate link. The professional assessment included in the 2026 dossier describes this as the core competency of a future queen, the capacity to provide genuine human connection without any requirement for transaction. A promise of continuity, not a pitch for followers. The Sussex logs from that same period record a different kind of planning. The launch date for a luxury product line was being aligned with the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth's passing, calculated, the logs show, to capture the peak search volume of that morning. What Meghan reportedly viewed as Catherine's lack of imagination. Dismissing her, according to sources, as an untalented prude, the 2026 revelations reframe entirely. What was dismissed as limitation was actually discipline. What was mistaken for absence of talent was the deliberate, principled refusal to perform for profit. The documents conclude with a clear institutional position. You cannot lead an institution if your primary interest is in leading a brand. One approach extracts value from the crown. The other adds value to the lives of the people the crown exists to serve. What began in a quiet sitting room in November 2017, with a woman looking at her shoes while being offered a bridge, ends here. In Parliament, in sealed testimony, in a 12-page document in a locked oak drawer. The investigation Catherine began, quietly and without fanfare, nearly a decade ago, has become a matter of constitutional record. The institution endures. Whether those who sought to commodify it will remain part of it, that answer is now in the hands of the law.